from the battlefield to the negotiating table, the future of global power is at stake. In today's reports, we break down how Russia is outproduced in NATO and how China's quiet support for the Kremlin is about to spark a major showdown. This is UATV English. Let's break it all down and put you in focus on these hot events. It ain't no secret that Putin isn't looking for peace. He's doubling down on war. Every night, Russian drones hit Ukrainian cities, and now NATO leaders fear Europe could be next. Germany is rushing to rearm. The US is stockpiling more missiles than ever before. But here's the shocker. Despite having its economy 20 times smaller, Russia still produces more ammo than all of NATO combined. So the question isn't just when the war ends, it's whether the West can catch up before it's too late. Watch more in our report.
Russian drones attacking Ukrainian cities every night speak louder than words, stated EU Defense and Space Commissioner Andrius Kubilius in an interview with CNN. The only response to the Kremlin's ongoing aggression can be peace through strength. Kubilius is convinced.
A lot of European leaders are very clearly saying that there is no clear picture that Putin will agree on peace if the situation will continue to be as it is now. Because perhaps he is considering that he is winning in this situation. And that is why, strength on Ukrainian side is one of the conditions how peace can be brought much more quickly. And that is what we need to do.
The obvious target of Russian aggression in the near future could be EU and NATO countries. This is being discussed by heads of Western intelligence agencies and European state leaders. Russia is the only country named as a long-term threat to NATO countries' security in the alliance's Hague Summit declaration. That is why Germany intends to urgently implement plans for large-scale rearmament of its army. Friedrich Merz's cabinet is set to accelerate the procurement of new weapons. The relevant bill has already been approved by the government and now awaits parliamentary approval. Changes in legislation will make it easier for defense companies to receive advance payments from the government to quickly start production. Defense Minister Boris Pistorius called this bill a quantum leap for the Bundeswehr, which will unlock progress in about 12,000 procurement processes.
The bill's catalog of measures is broad and will provide us with the necessary flexibility. We want to accelerate procurement to make Germany more secure. Boris Pistorius, Minister of Defense of Germany, in the comment for Bloomberg.
The United States will have more munitions and missiles than anyone in the world within a few months, stated President Donald Trump during a meeting with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos on July 22nd in Washington. The leaders discussed establishing a joint hub for ammunition production and storage 100 kilometers northwest of Manila.
We're going to have more missiles than any country has ever had. We're going to have all the speedy missiles. We'll have the speedy ones, the slow ones, the accurate ones, the ones that are slightly less accurate. We have everything. But we will have more ammunition than any country has ever had. It's very important to me.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has repeatedly spoken about Russia's advantage over alliance countries in ammunition production. According to his information, Russia's military-industrial complex produces several times more munitions than all NATO countries combined.
We have a problem, the United States part of NATO, the Canadian part of NATO, European part of NATO, that we are not producing enough defense industrial products. We are producing in a full year in ammunition what Russia is producing in 3 months. Russia has only 5% of NATO economy compared. So we are 20 times bigger, the overall NATO economy, than Russia, and Russia is producing 4 times more in ammunition than the whole of NATO is producing in a year. That's totally crazy. Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO, in an interview with Face the Nation.
According to the British Royal United Services Institute, Russia produced just over 1,152mm munitions in 2024. Meanwhile, according to a European Commission report, Europe is expected to produce up to 2,155mm munitions by the end of 2025. At the same time, the U.S. Army has requested over $3 billion to ramp up ammunition production, planning to manufacture up to 100,000 155mm shells per month by the end of 2025, as reported by the American Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, reported by Christina Dombrovska, UATV News.
China is fueling Russia's war, and now it seems that the US is done staying quiet. The US ambassador to NATO says that China is using Russia as a proxy in Ukraine. That means Beijing may not be sending tanks, but it's helping Moscow keep fighting, and the West is finally calling it out. Now, US and EU leaders are preparing for a major face-off with China in Stockholm. The pressure's rising, and this could be the moment China's double game is exposed. Let's break it all down.
China is using Russia as its proxy force, stated Matthew Whitaker, the U.S. permanent representative to NATO. In an interview with Fox Business, he emphasized that Washington intends to hold Beijing accountable for supporting Moscow. China is a key buyer of Russian oil and therefore a major sponsor of Russia's military-industrial complex. The White House has threatened secondary sanctions against anyone continuing to trade with the Kremlin. Whitaker noted that Washington has given Putin 50 days to negotiate a ceasefire with Kyiv.
China thinks they're fighting a proxy war through Russia, and we're seeing in some statements by the Chinese government that they want to keep the United States and our allies occupied with this war so that we can't focus on our other strategic challenges. And that's just not true. It's not going to happen. China, I think, is miscalculated, but I think they need to be called out for their subsidizing this killing that is happening on the battlefields in Ukraine.
By the end of July, the United States plans to directly address China's involvement in the war against Ukraine. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced that talks with the Chinese delegation will take place on July 28th and 29th in Stockholm. Washington intends to warn Beijing that purchasing sanctioned Russian oil and aiding the Kremlin's aggression are unacceptable.
Hopefully, we can see the Chinese pull back on some of this glut of manufacturing that they're doing and concentrate on building a consumer economy. We want to speak to them about the sanctioned Russian and Iranian oil that they're buying, what they're doing to aid Russia in the Ukraine war. So I think we've actually moved to a new level with China where it's very constructive and very we're going to be able to get a lot of things done now that trade has kind of settled in at a good level.
The dialogue may continue at the highest level. Donald Trump announced the possibility of visiting China. According to the South China Morning Post, a meeting with Chairman Xi could take place as early as this autumn.
President Xi has invited me to China, and we'll probably be doing that in the not too distant future, a little bit out, but not too distant. And I've been invited by a lot of people, and we'll make those decisions pretty soon.
Officially, Beijing claims to maintain a neutral stance, supporting neither Moscow nor Kyiv. In reality, it helps the Kremlin bypass sanctions and continue the war against Ukraine. This is stated not only in Washington, but also in Brussels. The EU has already imposed sanctions on 2 Chinese banks and 5 companies from China. Analysts are convinced that the US and the EU must unite in pressuring China. Beijing will not be able to withstand such pressure.
Therefore, it is extremely important for the Americans that this is a consolidated decision. If it is a decision of the 2 largest economies in the world, meaning the European and American ones, then China naturally won't be able to ignore such things. It simply won't have an alternative.
While partnership with Moscow remains beneficial for Beijing, the risks may increase in the future, especially if the US imposes tariffs on Russia and its allies.
Для Китая осень.
For China, autumn will be a challenging period when either by autumn, by the start or middle of it, they manage to reach some kind of agreement structure with Europe and the United States, or Russia becomes a more toxic asset. After all, by then, the U.S. election campaign and a series of decisions already adopted in the European Union will start to take effect, further narrowing the maneuvering space for the Russian economy, not to mention the internal accumulated problems that will also fully manifest by mid to late autumn.
After Chinese companies were hit by EU sanctions, China's Ministry of Commerce stated that such steps seriously harm trade, economic, and financial relations. Beijing promised to take all necessary measures to protect its interests. Reported by Nikita Skoblikov, UATV News.
These 2 reports show how global this war really is. This isn't just about Ukraine anymore. It's about alliances, power plays, and whether the West can act fast enough to make a difference. What happens next could reshape the world. Drop your thoughts and predictions on these developments below, and always stay in focus with UATV English.